While houses like the Baratheons, Lannisters, and Targaryens were busy bleeding for the Iron Throne, Varys and Petyr Baelish were the ones actually steering the ship. They didn't need armies. They used secret plans, subtle manipulations, and whispers in the right ears to decide the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. In the end, they held more power than almost anyone else in the realm, all without ever wearing a crown. But looking back at the wreckage they left behind, which one of them actually played the better game? Let's get into it. The Spider versus the Mockingbird. On the surface, Varys and Littlefinger couldn't be more different. Petyr Baelish thrived on chaos and believed that chaos is a ladder, what an iconic quote, for a man with enough ambition to climb it. On the other side, you have Varys, the patient gardener. Varys claimed to serve the realm, working with a terrifyingly long-term vision that made every move he made feel part of a decades-old grand design. So while one wanted to tear the system down to see what he could grab from the ruins, the other wanted to preserve the throne, at least his specific version of it. And this is why they represented two completely different ways to ruin a kingdom. But it will be impossible to understand their game without exploring how they clawed their way into the halls of power in the first place. The Ascent, Petyr Baelish, the outsider. Petyr Baelish literally started from nowhere. Petyr's great-grandfather was just a sellsword from Braavos, who came to Westeros to swing a sword for a paycheck. And when the line reached Petyr's father, they had become lords, but in name only, since they owned nothing more than a few rocky acres on the smallest of the fingers. But things changed for Petyr when his father became friends with Hoster Tully during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. That one friendship was Petyr's golden ticket. It got him sent to Riverrun as a ward, placing a boy from a nothing house right in the middle of one of the most powerful families in the Seven Kingdoms. And Petyr didn't live there as a guest. Instead, he was playing in the mud with Lysa and Catelyn, built block castles with Edmure, and went to the Blackfish Brynden Tully for advice, just like the rest of Hoster's children. But there was always a reminder that he didn't quite belong. Edmure even gave him the nickname Littlefinger, considering Petyr's small stature and his family's tiny, worthless holdings. It was meant to be a joke, but for Petyr, it was a label he'd eventually turn into a weapon.
When I was a child, I was very small, and I come from a little spit of land called the Fingers, so you see, it's an exceedingly clever nickname.
But as the kids hit their teens, the dynamics got really messy. Petyr was head over heels for Catelyn and followed her everywhere, while Cat only looked at him as a younger brother. We can't say the same for Lysa, who was desperately in love with Petyr, and it all boiled over during a festival at Riverrun, where Petyr tried to kiss Catelyn, but she laughed it all off, leaving him heartbroken. Later that night, he got completely drunk and made out with Lysa, thinking she was Cat. But the real wake-up call came after Catelyn's engagement to the highborn Brandon Stark. Petyr, who was only 15, did the most insane thing he could possibly have done and challenged Brandon to a duel, a fight that left him with a scar he'd always remember.
I understand you knew my brother Brandon as well.
All too well. I still carry a token of his esteem, from navel to collarbone.
Perhaps you chose the wrong man to duel with.
Well, it wasn't the man that I chose, my lord. It was Catelyn Tully, a woman worth fighting for. I'm sure you'll agree.
Lysa took care of him, and the two slept together again, only this time, she became pregnant. Lord Hoster Tully didn't care about Petyr's heart or his child. He only saw a lowborn boy who'd overstepped. So he kicked Petyr out and forced Lysa to drink moon tea to abort the baby. Catelyn eventually married Lord Eddard Stark after Brandon's death at King's Landing, while Lysa married Jon Arryn of the Eyrie.
My temper. Gods be good. You nearly killed poor Littlefinger yesterday.
He still loves you.
While Catelyn forgot all about Petyr once she went to Winterfell, Lysa convinced Jon Arryn to give Petyr customs at Gulltown, giving him control of the city's port. Using his success at increasing the port's income, Lysa convinced Jon to bring Petyr to court in King's Landing. Petyr started as a minor player in customs, but brought in 3 times as much as the royal collectors. And within the next 3 years, Littlefinger became the master of coin and a member of the small council. He placed his own people in important places to increase his influence, and created a complex web of loans and investments to supply the king and the hand with enough gold. Over time, Petyr's expertise as the master of coin made him indispensable in King's Landing, giving him power he'd only dreamed of as a child. Varys, the survivor. Let's move on to Varys now, who, just like Littlefinger, came from nothing. Varys was born a slave in Lees and spent his childhood travelling with a troupe of mummers, basically circus performers, moving between the free cities in Westeros. But everything changed during a stop in Myr, when a man offered a huge sum for Varys, and his master didn't think twice before selling him. However, this man wasn't looking for a performer, but a guinea pig. He gave Varys a potion that paralyzed him completely. He was unable to move or speak, but he could feel everything. During the same ritual, the man cut Varys' manhood off at the stem and burned it, before tossing him out into the streets like trash.
Hooked blade, he sliced me, root and stem, chanting all the while. He burned my parts in a brazier. The flames turned blue, and I heard a voice answer his call.
Most kids would have died right there, but Varys was much stronger. He survived by begging, stealing, even prostitution, and over time he became the best thief in Myr. But his expertise ruffled far too many feathers, and he was forced to flee to Pentos. That's where Varys met a poor sellsword named Illyrio Morpatis, and they came up with a genius plan. They decided that Varys would steal items from other thieves, and Illyrio would miraculously find them and return them to their owners for a fee. They got rich and fast, but Varys realized that gold always had a price. But a secret? That was priceless.
And soon learned that the contents of a man's letters are more valuable than the contents of his purse.
So he started buying orphans and taught them how to climb walls and read ledgers instead of just picking pockets. Varys would call them his little birds, and by the time they were done, Varys didn't just have money, he had the secrets of every powerful man in Pentos. He wasn't just a thief anymore. He was the spider with a web that spanned across the free cities. Meanwhile, King Aerys Targaryen in Westeros, better known as the Mad King, was falling apart. The king was convinced that everyone wanted his life, his wife, his son Rhaegar, and his hand Tywin Lannister. So when he heard of Varys' talents, he sent for him immediately. But for a paranoid king like Aerys, bringing in Varys turned out to be a terrible choice, since he was able to point out traitors too quickly for Aerys' sensitive mind. And while the king was battling with traitors within his court, Varys was busy using the crown's gold to expand his network of little birds, and learning every secret in and outside the castle.
My little birds are everywhere, even in the north.
When Robert Baratheon won the rebellion and defeated Aerys, the king ignored Varys' advice and opened his gates to Tywin Lannister and his men, which eventually led to the infamous sack of King's Landing. Jaime Lannister murdered the king, and the Lannister men killed Princess Elia Martell and her children, effectively ending the Targaryen rule. After Robert became king, Varys was pardoned, along with Jaime and Grand Maester Pycelle, and Varys remained the Master of Whisperers for the new king. The Catalyst. Now that we've set the chessboard, let's look at the moves that toppled kingdoms and every rule we thought the game was played by, starting with Petyr Baelish. Petyr set the wheels in motion from the first season by convincing Lysa Arryn to poison her husband, who was also the Hand of the King.
You gave me those drops and told me to pour them into John's wine, my husband's wine.
With Jon Arryn gone, King Robert needed a new hand to help him run the realm so he could drink his life away. So he travelled north and offered the position to Ned Stark, who agreed because Robert was his old friend. But the same night, Catelyn received a letter from Lysa, blaming the Lannisters for her husband's death.
When you told me to write a letter to Cat, she says Jon Arryn was murdered by the Lannisters. She says the king is in danger.
Of course, this was also part of Petyr's plan, but Catelyn never doubted Lysa or Petyr. This was enough to convince Ned that only he could protect the king. So he rode south, not knowing that he had landed himself in Petyr's trap. Meanwhile, a paid assassin broke into Bran Stark's chambers, who was already in a coma from his fall, and tried to finish him off with a Valyrian steel dagger. The assassin would have succeeded if it weren't for Bran's direwolf, who attacked the man and saved Bran. But this attempt on her son's life alerted Catelyn, and she immediately rode to King's Landing to tell Ned what had happened. Catelyn believed the Lannisters were behind the assassination attempt, which in turn meant that Ned was not safe either. But before she could meet Ned, Petyr had her intercepted and brought Catelyn to one of his brothels so her arrival could remain a secret. At least, that's what he told her. In reality, Petyr wanted to instigate a war between two of the most powerful houses in Westeros, the Starks and the Lannisters. And the biggest catalyst was framing Tyrion Lannister as the bad guy.
There's only one dagger like this in all of the Seven Kingdoms. I lost this dagger.
To whom?
Tyrion Lannister. The imp.
Littlefinger was a master at the game of deception. He positioned himself as the ultimate friend of the Starks, someone they could trust blindly. But in truth, Petyr was pushing them into situations that could only end in disaster. And even though Tyrion had nothing to do with what happened to Bran during the royal visit, Petyr's lie pushed Catelyn into capturing Tyrion, sending the first clear sign of war to the Lannisters.
In the name of King Robert and the good lords you serve, I call upon you to seize him.
Back at King's Landing, Petyr was helping Ned get to the truth of Jon Arryn's death, starting with the Book of Lineages, which would put Ned on the path to discovering Robert's bastards. Information that was so explosive that it would jeopardize Ned's life. But Petyr already knew that. In fact, that's exactly what he wanted.
After that, you might want him to visit a certain armorer in the city. He lives in a large house at the top of the Street of Steel.
And when Ned finally learned the truth about Cersei and her bastard children, he wanted to tell the king immediately. But Robert injured himself in a hunting accident and died. Seeing this as an opportunity, Petyr urged Ned to rule the kingdom as Lord Protector. Petyr suggested that they let Joffrey become king, but rule as the power behind the throne. This would have kept the peace, and kept Petyr in power. But Ned had better principles, and therefore refused his offer. Ned wanted Stannis to become king, as he was the rightful heir after Robert. Petyr didn't like where Ned was going, so he betrayed him to the Lannisters at the last minute.
I did warn you not to trust me.
With that one move, Petyr didn't just betray Ned, he decapitated the North's leadership. Petyr knew that by handing Ned to Cersei, he was guaranteeing a war would burn the Seven Kingdoms to the ground, and he was more than ready to climb the ashes. Everything Petyr did so far was to advance his own power and stature. He did not care at all about the massive consequences of his actions or the people he was hurting along the way, as long as he got what he saw as his. Varys, on the other hand, had very little ambition. Varys craved power and a strong network of spies, yes, but his end goal was incredibly different from Petyr's.
What do you want? Tell me. No riddles, no stories. Tell me, what do you want?
Peace.
Varys was spying on the Targaryens for King Robert, but deep down, he was rooting for them to eventually claim the Iron Throne. Every move he made was carefully planned to empower the Targaryens and bring them to King's Landing. You see, Varys was working his way towards a better world, where the innocent didn't have to suffer, and he believed the Targaryens were better than most houses. So Varys planned a long game, with his friend across the sea, Illyrio Mopatis, who housed Viserys and Daenerys in Pentos and fed them for years. The two even got Daenerys married to Drogo, who was the Khal, or the leader of the Dothraki.
Come forward, my dear.
The marriage wasn't just a romantic arrangement, it came with a promise that Drogo would use his army to win the Targaryens the Iron Throne. In fact, it was Illyrio who gave Dany 3 petrified dragon's eggs as a wedding gift, the same eggs that later hatched into dragons and conquered Westeros. Varys' intentions remained elusive from the beginning, until Arya Stark overheard him in the Dragon's Skull dungeon. Varys warned Illyrio about the conflict between the Starks and the Lannisters, moving too fast and the chances of Ned discovering the whole truth soon enough.
Good is warm now. We're not ready. If one hand can die, why not a second?
This hand is not the other.
We need time. Khal Drogo will not make his move until his son is born. You know what these savages are.
But Daenerys' pregnancy put Varys in a difficult situation, as Robert wanted her dead. On one hand, he wanted to keep Dany. On the other, he wanted to maintain his cover at King's Landing. So Varys bribed a wine merchant to poison Dany and sent a letter to Jorah Mormont, his spy, tipping him off to the attack. This way, Varys played both sides and satisfied Robert's lust for blood, while ensuring the Targaryen bloodline survived. And when Ned was captured, thanks to Petyr, It was Varys who went to the Black Cells to control the damage. Varys knew that if Ned was executed, the North would rise and the Seven Kingdoms would shatter. So he convinced Ned to swallow his pride and confess to treason to save his daughters.
What of your daughter's life, my lord? Is that a precious thing to you?
And Varys' plan would have worked too if Joffrey hadn't turned into a mad king himself at the last moment, a move that triggered the War of the Five Kings. Varys was horrified at Ned's execution, while Petyr reveled in it. After all, Petyr was the one who really brought him to the steps of the Great Sept of Baelor, and we can see the satisfaction on Petyr's face. So who walked away from the table with the most chips? Let's compare. Littlefinger had Lysa kill Jon Arryn, vacating both positions of Lord of the Vale and the Hand of the King, and opening new doors for him. Petyr was also successful in pitting the Starks against the Lannisters with all his schemes and tricks, and it was Ned Stark and his daughters, Sansa and Arya, who had to pay the real price for it. But Petyr played his part in the execution so well that none of the Starks suspected him. This shows the true extent of his mastery of manipulation and secrecy. While Petyr was spreading his web of lies, Varys was also getting closer to his goals. Varys helped the Targaryens strike a deal with the Dothraki army, giving them immense leverage whenever the war reached King's Landing. Varys also managed to maintain Robert's trust and keep Dany alive at the same time, a victory only the best of schemers can boast. But Varys was also unable to keep the peace in King's Landing after Ned Stark's execution, because there was only so much a Master of Whisperers can do. So it's safe to say Petyr wins this first round. But we're only getting started, guys. Buckle in, a lot more to go. Manufacturing a crisis. By now, Petyr was no longer a city-bound bureaucrat, but a power broker widening his reach to every corner of Westeros. And while King's Landing faced a real threat of war, and Varys was trying to contain the damage, Petyr was using this chaos to climb as high and far as he could. After Ned, Tyrion was made the new Hand of the King, and since Tyrion knew he was swimming in a shark tank called the Small Council, he decided to find out which shark was the hungriest. So, he told Varys, Petyr, and Pycelle 3 different stories about Princess Myrcella's future to see which of them would run to Cersei first. Tyrion promised he'd make Littlefinger the Lord of Harrenhal, and Lord of Paramount of the Trident in exchange for his assistance in Myrcella's wedding to Robin Arryn. And since titles and armies mattered more to Petyr than any loyalties to the crown, he kept his secret.
Single stroke, you'd make me one of the greatest lords in the realm.
You served my family well.
However, when Petyr later found out that all of this was a ruse, his trust in Tyrion was broken. But not for long, as Tyrion made him another offer, one that he couldn't refuse. He offered Petyr a mission where he'd travel to the Stormlands, meet Catelyn, and strike a deal for Arya and Sansa's return in exchange for Jaime Lannister. Petyr agreed, but not for the Lannisters' sake. Petyr wanted the titles Tyrion was offering, but he also wanted to form new alliances, which is why he promised to betray the Lannisters and open the gates for Renly Baratheon's army once he reached the Stormlands.
When you march on King's Landing, you may find yourself facing a protracted siege, or open gates.
Next, Petyr tried to rekindle a flame that died decades ago with Catelyn, but when that plan failed, he offered her Tyrion's terms.
The Lannisters will trade your daughters for the Kingslayer.
Of course they will. Jaime Lannister for 2 girls. Robb will never agree to those terms.
I'm not bringing these terms to him. I'm bringing them to you.
Of course, Petyr lied about Arya's presence in King's Landing, but Catelyn still believed him, and knowing that Robb wouldn't release Jaime on those terms, she acted alone and released Jaime illegally, entrusting Brienne of Tarth with the rogue attempt to trade him for the girls. But this one act ruined Robb's political standing and led to the execution of Rickard Karstark, eventually forcing Robb into the desperate situation that ended in the Red Wedding. While still at Renly's camp, Petyr also met Margaery Tyrell, Renly's wife, and reminded her that their marriage was just a political arrangement.
Do you want to be a queen?
No. I want to be the queen.
And Petyr was counting on that, because he wanted the Tyrells to join the Lannisters through Joffrey and Margaery's marriage. A move that proved to be a brilliant masterstroke, really. One that saved the capital during the Battle of the Blackwater. Finally, Littlefinger was elevated to Lord of Harrenhal as a reward for arranging the alliance.
You honor me beyond words, Your Grace. I shall have to acquire some sons and grandsons.
Now more powerful than ever before, Petyr turned his attention to Sansa, who thought that Margaery's marriage with Joffrey would finally set her free. Petyr reminded her that she was still at Joffrey's mercy and offered to take her home. But Sansa didn't trust the man any more than her ex-fiancé.
For her sake, I'll help get you home.
King's Landing is my home now.
While Littlefinger was playing foreign diplomat to increase his own rank and standing, Varys was busy acting as the master of defense. Varys knew that if the city fell to Stannis Baratheon, his long game for the Targaryens and the stability of the realm would end at the tip of a sword. So Varys decided to help the Lannisters win the war against Stannis. And since Tyrion was the only one with a brain in King's Landing, it feels like, he defended Tyrion as the new hand of the king, and even empowered him with the knowledge he gained through his network of spies.
But rest easy, my lord. I am very good at keeping secrets for my good friends.
If it wasn't for Varys' guidance, Tyrion would have been assassinated by Cersei's court long before the Battle of the Blackwater. Right at the beginning of the season, when Joffrey ordered the slaughter of all of Robert's bastards, Varys had already arranged for Gendry to be sent out of the city with Yoren and the Night's Watch recruits.
I have a royal warrant. For one of these gutter rats you're transporting.
These gutter rats belong to the Night's Watch now. That puts them beyond the reach of kings and queens.
By saving the last piece of Robert's true bloodline, he kept a spare Baratheon in play for the future. A move that eventually paid off seasons later when Gendry became a key ally in the Great War. Later, when Stannis' army was marching towards King's Landing, Varys helped Tyrion plan a solid defense by offering a map of the tunnel network under the city. So after Tyrion had successfully destroyed all of Stannis' ships with a single ghost ship, he led a small group of soldiers through these tunnels to lead a final charge. But after the Tyrells and Lannisters arrived, Tyrion and Varys were completely forgotten. Not that Varys needed any recognition, but Tyrion took a huge hit, having been betrayed first by his own sister, who ordered an attack on him through Sir Mandon, and then by his father, who just as easily replaced him as Hand of the King.
These are your new chambers. A little cramped, perhaps, but you don't need much room, do you?
By now, Varys knew Tyrion hated his own family, except for Jaime, and that hatred could turn him into a powerful ally for the Targaryens. And while we're on the topic of allies, Varys also recruited Ross, a prostitute who worked for Petyr in his brothel.
Littlefinger looks at you and sees a collection of profitable holes. I see a potential partner.
So, who was the master and who was the apprentice? We'll briefly borrow from another franchise, eh? Mace Windu offering some wisdom and helping us break it down. Littlefinger had earned himself the title of Lord of Harrenhal and brokered an alliance between two of the most powerful houses in Westeros, the Lannisters and the Tyrells. Varys, on the other hand, saved King's Landing with Tyrion, along with hundreds of innocent lives. Varys' chosen queen, Daenerys Targaryen, now had 3 dragons and a burning ambition to conquer Westeros, all of which brought Varys closer to his end goal. But did Varys make any big moves? Not really. Sure, Varys was helpful and saved lives, but his gameplay was safe and quiet, unlike Petyr, who took massive risks, first by offering to help Renly when it came to King's Landing, then by lying to Catelyn about Arya. And how can we forget the alliance that finally earned a nobody from the Fingers an important rank, with lands and revenue no less? If you judge by the size of the trophy, Littlefinger definitely wins. Petyr walked in as a servant and walked out as a lord with a massive castle. That's a win. Additionally, he successfully manipulated Catelyn, outmaneuvered Stannis by bringing in the Tyrells, and secured his future. The Duel of Wits. Moving forwards, the two masterminds found themselves in a battle of wits and cunning. and while they wanted different things, their path became impossibly tangled. By now, Littlefinger had realized that King's Landing was a sinking ship, since he was the one who had drilled the holes, no less. So Peter's next move was to get the hell out of the capital, and build his own fortress using his new title and influence. Peter gave his position as Master of Coin to Tyrion, purchased a ship, and prepared to sail to the Eyrie with a marriage proposal to the widowed Lysa Arryn. But that wasn't his only plan. Peter knew that Sansa could be a more politically powerful wife than Lysa, and leaving her in King's Landing would potentially be a mistake. It would almost certainly allow someone else to claim that potential power for themselves. So, Peter told Sansa he would smuggle her out of King's Landing and take her to safety.
When I set sail, I might be able to take you with me, but you'll need to be ready to leave on a moment's notice.
Sansa, who had already suffered enough thanks to Joffrey, was eager to leave with him, but she didn't know that Peter intended to use her for his own advantage. But Varys knew exactly what Peter was up to. Remember when Varys recruited Ross into his spider network? Now Ross was secretly spying on Peter, so when she found out that he had made Sansa an offer, she immediately went to Varys with that information.
2 feather beds. He's bringing 2 feather beds for the cabin.
Could he be bringing one of his girls?
He's not interested in them, my lord.
How do you know?
Because I'm one of his girls.
Varys understood how important Sansa was. With the younger Stark boys dead, Arya lost, and Robb fighting a war that was becoming impossible to win, Sansa was Robb's legal heir if something happened to him, so whoever married her would eventually control the North. And for someone as important as Sansa to fall into the hands of someone as selfish as Lord Baelish would only mean disaster. So Varys met with Olenna Tyrell and subtly proposed an alliance between the Tyrells and the Stark's daughter.
If Littlefinger marries her, he'll have the key in his pocket.
Which seems such a shame. Why should a man with such a low reputation steal away such a lovely bride? But he would see this country burn if he could be king of the ashes.
Olenna was a very smart woman and made her first move towards Sansa as soon as she could.
And if you were to marry Loras... well, your place would be at Highgarden, wouldn't it?
Suddenly Sansa wasn't so eager to set sail with Peter, and every time he'd mention going away from King's Landing, she would propose a reason to delay it. In the beginning, Peter didn't understand the reason behind this sudden shift in Sansa's priorities, but it all came full circle during the same season. You see, Cersei didn't trust the Tyrells. Wise. Even though they saved King's Landing at the Battle of Blackwater. So she asked Peter to spy on them and find out exactly what they were after.
And your best will prove better than when I asked you to locate Arya Stark.
I assure you that it will.
Peter, in turn, ordered one of his homosexual prostitutes, Oliver, to take up the position of Loras' squire and eventually seduce him all the way to the bedroom. Peter's plan worked, and Oliver discovered the Tyrells' plans of marrying Sir Loras to Sansa. When this information reached Peter, he tested Sansa with the same escape offer, but when she refused to join him on the ship, Peter knew this was Varys doing. That, in turn, clued him on to exactly what was going on. The only person who could have tipped Varys off was Ross.
But maybe it would be better to wait. I've been thinking how dangerous it would be. Not just for me, but for you.
When Peter told Cersei about the Tyrells' plan, the Lannisters proposed a new arrangement where Tyrion would marry Sansa instead of Loras. Since Sansa was really a captive in King's Landing, she didn't have much choice in the matter, and neither did Tyrion.
There, you see? You will wed her better and put a child in her.
But what Peter did next showed just how cruel he could be. Instead of confronting Ross, he gave her to King Joffrey to be tortured and eventually killed. Ross's brutal death was also a warning for Varys that Peter wasn't to be messed with. It was the first time Varys and Peter confronted each other, keeping all masks and riddles aside.
Some are given a chance to climb, but they refuse. They cling to the realm, or the gods, or love. Only the latter is real. The climb is all there is.
That perfectly sums up Peter's philosophy for life. And since things didn't go as Varys and Peter had hoped, we can probably call this one even. But Peter still sailed for the Vale to marry Lysa, an exciting prospect for a man hungry for power. Climbing the ladder. After the one-on-one war, Varys and Littlefinger moved in very different directions. Let's start with Petyr, who initially pretended to sail out of Blackwater Bay, but was actually idling around, waiting for the trap he had set to spring. Although Olenna Tyrell wanted Margaery to be queen, she didn't want her to be Joffrey's queen, so she hatched a plan with Petyr to kill the king at his wedding. Petyr acquired a rare, untraceable poison called the Strangler, and used Ser Dontos to deliver it to Sansa in the form of a necklace.
But this is worth more than my life.
By putting the poison on Sansa, Petyr achieved two things. He kept his own hands clean, and ensured that if anyone looked closely at the weapon, the trail would lead straight to the Stark girl. Olenna agreed to this because she knew she could get close enough to Sansa at the wedding feast to pluck the stone without anyone noticing.
I haven't had the opportunity to tell you how sorry I was to hear about your brother. War is war, but killing a man at a wedding.
Meanwhile, Ser Dontos convinced Sansa that he'd take her home. So when Joffrey began to choke at the purple wedding from the Strangler, Ser Dontos grabbed Sansa and led her out of the castle, eventually delivering her to Petyr's ship.
Lord Baelish.
Petyr, are you hurt, my lady? Good, good. I'm sure you've had quite a fright. Rest easy. The worst is past.
And as soon as Sansa was in Petyr's custody, he ordered his men to kill Ser Dontos because he didn't trust drunk fools. Petyr's cold execution of Dontos showed just how little he cared about the people who worked for him. And this was the first time that Sansa saw the real person behind Petyr's mask of kindness. Littlefinger then took Sansa to the Vale under the guise of his niece Elaine. But as soon as he reached there, Lysa demanded the two of them get married immediately. Petyr agreed to marry Lysa, but it wasn't for love. He just wanted to become Lord Protector of the Vale, with command of one of the only armies in Westeros that hadn't been depleted by the War of the Five Kings. And once Petyr got what he wanted, he set his eyes on his next victim, Sansa.
You're more beautiful than she ever was.
Lord Baelish.
Call me Petyr.
And that one kiss was enough to send Lysa spiraling into murderous jealousy. And in a fit of rage, she tried to throw Sansa through the moon door, but Petyr got there just in time. He calmed Lysa down and reassured her that the only woman he ever loved was her sister, Catelyn, just before shoving her through the hole.
Your sister.
In a single move, Petyr stopped being a husband and became the sole ruler of the Vale. The season ended with Petyr facing a trial by the Lords of the Vale, who were suspicious of Lysa's suicide. That's where we see the fruit of his mentorship. Petyr was prepared to lie his way out, but Sansa stepped forward and told a version of the truth that cleared his name.
When Lord Baelish tried to calm her, she struck him. She said she didn't want to live anymore. She stood on the edge of that moon door. He tried to reason with her, promised her she was the only one he had ever loved, but she stepped through those doors.
When Sansa lied for Petyr, she had no idea about the horrors he had planned for her. But Petyr was certainly relieved his gambit paid off, and in a big way. And while Petyr did some very exciting things, Varys also made life-changing decisions that impacted some of the key players in Game of Thrones. By now, Varys had grown fond of Tyrion Lannister. He saw him as a friend, and someone he could trust. So, when Tyrion's relationship with Shae became too serious, Varys warned him about his father's intentions.
I have friends across the sea who could help her.
She won't leave. I've told him this is a dangerous place so many times she no longer believes it.
Your father has promised to hang the next whore he finds you with.
Tyrion eventually convinced Shae to leave the capital by humiliating her enough to make her hate him. But that was probably not the smartest move in hindsight, because his cruelty came to bite him at his trial for Joffrey's murder. Tyrion's trial was full of surprises, and the first one came early on with Varys' testimony. Varys told the court about Tyrion's threat to Joffrey at a small council meeting, right after they heard news of Robb Stark's death.
Monsters are dangerous, and just now kings are dying like flies.
Varys also confessed that Tyrion wasn't exactly happy to hear about the Stark's murders, maybe because he was now married to one of them. His testimony was damning, and Varys knew it, but he had another plan in mind for Tyrion, Unfortunately, Tyrion didn't know anything about Varys' plans and felt betrayed by someone he considered his friend.
You said the histories would never mention, but you would not forget. Have you forgotten, Lord Varys?
Sadly, my lord, I never forget a thing.
And if Tyrion wasn't heartbroken enough, his lover, Shae, also testified against him, saying that Tyrion planned Joffrey's murder with Sansa. By then, Tyrion had understood that the whole trial was a sham, and his father simply wanted to punish him. So he demanded a trial by combat instead. Too bad that didn't work for him either, as Tyrion's champion, Oberyn Martell, was brutally killed by the Mountain during the fight. Close isn't good enough. From that moment on, Tyrion's fate was sealed, but Varys didn't want him to die, so he helped Jaime Lannister free Tyrion from the dungeon and ship him off to Essos.
It's a locked door at the top of the stairs. Knock on it twice, and twice again. Varys will open.
But as ever, things didn't exactly go as planned. Instead of knocking on the door, Tyrion went to confront his father for punishing him for a crime he didn't commit. But when Tyrion saw Shae in his bed, something snapped inside him. In a fit of rage, he first killed Shae and then Tywin before meeting up with Varys.
Trust me, my friend. I've brought you this far.
Varys placed Tyrion inside a container and had it placed on a ship sailing to Essos. But just as Varys turned to go back into the castle, he heard bells ringing inside, which only meant trouble. So he quietly turned around and boarded the ship. So, after all that, who's actually leading the dance now? Well, Petyr achieved what seemed the impossible. He had the Vale's military power at his back, he had the heir to the north in his pocket, and the Lannisters still thought he was their loyal servant. Petyr had effectively moved his pieces into the perfect position to strike the north, all while the rest of the world thought he was just a grieving widower. As for Varys, he had effectively burned his life's work. All those years spent building a network of spies in the capital, and Varys threw it all away to save the one man he called his friend. Although it was an impulsive move, it proved that Varys wasn't after power or money. Instead, Varys was a visionary who believed good people like Tyrion and Daenerys could build and create a better world. So he burned all the bridges and headed to Essos, turning his long game into a reality. But if we compare Petyr and Varys' moves, at least at this point, Petyr would probably win, since everything he planned became a reality, just as he wanted. Serving different queens. By this time, Petyr Baelish had stopped playing the local game in the Vale and bet on a massive, multi-regional gamble with his favourite pawn, Sansa. Petyr's first act as protector of the Vale was to put Lysa's son in charge and head north with Sansa. They stopped at an inn on their way, and coincidentally, Brienne of Tarth was also there. Since Brienne had sworn to Catelyn that she'd protect her daughters, she approached Sansa, who was heavily guarded by Petyr's men. She pleaded her case, but Petyr convinced Sansa that Brienne had first failed Lord Renly and then Catelyn, so she couldn't be trusted.
I saw you at Joffrey's wedding, bowing to the king.
Neither of us wanted to be there. Sometimes we don't have a choice.
And sometimes we do.
Brienne eventually had to flee from Petyr's men, but she quietly followed Sansa as they approached the ruins of Moat Cailin. And that's when Sansa realized that Petyr was actually taking her to Winterfell, a castle that was now being ruled by the Boltons. And suddenly, all the pieces, all the chips, fell into place on the board, and she knew whose marriage proposal Petyr had received from the Raven earlier. As expected, Sansa did not want to marry a Bolton, especially after Roose killed her brother and captured her home. She didn't even want to go back to Winterfell, but Petyr convinced her that it was the best way to get her revenge.
You've been a bystander to tragedy from the day they executed your father. Stop being a bystander, do you hear me? Stop running.
But Sansa wasn't the only one Petyr had to convince, because even though marrying his son to a Stark had its charm, Roose Bolton was suspicious of Petyr's intentions behind this match, especially if you consider that the Lannisters had rewarded Petyr with Harrenhal quite recently. Petyr was prepared for his questions and assured him that the Lannisters' time was over since Tywin's death.
The Eyrie is mine. The last time the Lords of the Eyrie formed an alliance with the Lords of the North, they brought down the greatest dynasty this world has ever known.
Petyr was still Roose Bolton's guest when he received a message from Cersei to return to the capital. Since Petyr was secretly playing both sides, he left Sansa at Winterfell and followed Cersei's orders. A precarious line to be walking. But before leaving, Petyr told Sansa that Stannis would soon march to Winterfell and defeat the Boltons, and then march to King's Landing. This was, of course, a lie, but it was enough to take any suspicion off him.
Stannis takes Winterfell. He rescues you from the most despised family in the north. Grateful for your late father's courageous support of his claim, he names you Wardeness of the North.
Now, when Petyr returned to King's Landing, he saw a completely different capital, one that the newly established Faith Militant almost ruled. When he finally met Cersei, Petyr questioned her about whether it was wise to mess with the Tyrell, since she had used the Militants to arrest their heir, Sir Loras Tyrell. But Cersei deflected Petyr's accusations like a pro, before questioning his loyalty towards the crown, since he was now the protector of the Vale. Petyr was quick to assure her that he'd always support her cause, while in reality, he had been plotting against the Lannisters and the crown for many, many years. But then Petyr made his final move and told Cersei about the Boltons' plan of marrying Sansa Stark to Ramsay. This little piece of information enraged Cersei, because how could Sansa flee from the capital and travel all the way back on her own to marry a traitor? What she didn't know was that her son's killer and Sansa's benefactor was sitting right in front of her. Petyr was just that good. And then, when Cersei lost her cool and swore to kill Roose Bolton, Petyr advised her to be patient and let Stannis and Ruth fight for the North. And whoever remained standing, well, Cersei could just kill them and take back Winterfell. It was a great plan. But the king's army wasn't skilled to fight in the cold, so Petyr offered the Vale's army to fight her battles instead. And in return, he only wanted one small thing.
And if you succeed?
Name me Warden of the North.
After convincing Cersei of his loyalty, Petyr met with Olenna Tyrell, who was worried about the Tyrells' future in the capital. Olenna believed Petyr had played a part in Loras' arrest and reminded him they were accomplices in Joffrey's murder. So if House Tyrell fell, Olenna would make sure Petyr went down with it too. Of course, Petyr knew that this was no idle threat, so he told Olenna a secret that would change the tide in King's Landing in the Tyrells' favor.
I have a gift for you.
What kind of gift?
The same kind I gave Cersei. A handsome young man.
Petyr told Olenna about Cersei's affair with Lancel Lannister, who in turn got Cersei arrested by the High Sparrow for adultery. That single confession from Petyr changed Cersei's life, pulling her down from a position of great power to parading on the streets of King's Landing in shame. And while Petyr was playing the big game, Varys was making his way to Daenerys Targaryen with an extremely reluctant partner, Tyrion. After they escaped King's Landing, the two reached Pentos, where Varys told Tyrion how he had quietly planned for Dany's rise to power for many years. He also tried to give Tyrion a new purpose in life and play a part in restoring peace in the realm.
I believe men of talent have a part to play in the war to come.
But Tyrion remained skeptical about the Dragon Queen and Varys' ideas and ideologies for a perfect world. But despite his reluctance, he joined Varys on his journey to Meereen through Volantis to meet Daenerys.
Can I drink myself to death on the road to Meereen?
But they had to travel in a closed carriage for days, since Cersei had promised lordship to any man who brought Tyrion's head. And the closed space eventually made Tyrion tired and impatient, so they stopped on the outskirts of Volantis to explore the markets and brothels. But Tyrion's bad luck followed him here too, as he ran into Jorah Mormont. Now, Jorah wanted to win back Dany's favour, so he kidnapped Tyrion and took him to Meereen, hoping for a pardon from his queen. Meanwhile, Varys Birds kept him informed about Tyrion's movements, especially after he reached Meereen.
Pleasure to meet you, Your Grace. My name is Tyrion Lannister.
Varys was right about Tyrion from the start, as he quickly convinced Daenerys of his worth if she were to rule the Seven Kingdoms. Tyrion also informed her about Varys' true intentions behind sending Jorah Mormont to spy on her.
I'd given up on life, until Varys convinced me you might be worth living for.
Daenerys let Tyrion stay on as her advisor, but he couldn't serve her long, as Drogon flew her to the Dothraki Sea right after the deadly ambush at Daznak's pit. Since no one knew where Drogon flew Dany, Jorah Mormont and Daario Naharis went looking for her, leaving Tyrion with the difficult task of controlling Meereen with the Unsullied. But Tyrion was soon joined by Varys, whose spies knew everything that was happening in and outside Meereen.
I'd given up on life, until Varys convinced me you might be worth living for.
So far, Petyr had managed to set 2 massive fires and then walked away to watch them burn. By giving Sansa to the Boltons, Petyr destroyed the last of her innocents, but he also placed a ticking time bomb in the heart of Winterfell. Then Petyr went right back to King's Landing and secured the legal right to the north before handing Olenna Tyrell the match that would burn Cersei's world down. By neutralizing the Lannisters, the Tyrells, and the Baratheons, and placing a pawn in Winterfell, Petyr destabilized the entire 7 kingdoms. If we look at Varys, he helped Tyrion escape execution and convinced him to join Daenerys in her mission to conquer Westeros. On one hand, he allowed Tyrion to showcase his intelligence. On the other, he gave Dany an advisor who understood the complexities of ruling King's Landing. Daenerys and Tyrion's alliance was like the ultimate payoff for every secret Varys ever whispered. So, which of these 2 masterminds actually controlled the board? I still have to say Petyr, because he outsmarted the most powerful leaders of houses like the Lannisters, Starks, Boltons, Tyrells, and even the Vale. But can he stay on top until the very end? We'll find that one out soon enough. Playing the big game. When Petyr returned to the Vale without Sansa, he had to explain how she ended up in the north, and married to a Bolton no less. Petyr, being the nigh-perfect liar he was, told Robb and Arryn, Lysa's sickly son, that they were ambushed on the way to the Fingers. Petyr even threw Jon Royce under the bus by hinting that he probably tipped the Boltons off.
I shared my intentions with you, and no one else.
Slander a man in his own home, you might find yourself crossing swords with him.
Now that all eyes were off him and on Jon instead, Petyr made his second move and convinced Robin that Sansa needed his help to take back Winterfell. And that's how Petyr successfully engaged House Arryn in a battle that was never theirs to begin with. But he didn't stop at that, because when does Petyr ever play or gamble in half measures? Petyr knew just how important Sansa was in his plans to rule the North, so he tried to make amends for her disastrous marriage to Ramsay.
Did you know about Ramsay? If you didn't know, you're an idiot. If you did know, you're my enemy.
But despite his apologies and promises to rally the Vale's army to her cause, Sansa couldn't forgive Petyr or trust him again. So when too many houses rejected Sansa and Jon's call for support, Sansa was left with limited options, and one of them was House Arryn. So she secretly wrote to Petyr and took him up on his previous offer. And Petyr's timing in the Battle of the Bastards couldn't have been better, because just as the Stark force was on the verge of being slaughtered, the Knights of the Vale rode in and rescued them all. But despite his help in retaking Winterfell, Sansa couldn't trust Petyr. A little bit of wisdom in that. Even after, of course, he confessed he wanted to sit on the Iron Throne with Sansa as his queen.
I've declared for House Stark for all to hear.
You've declared for other houses before Lord Baelish. It's never stopped you from serving yourself.
Petyr wanted Sansa to rule the North and reminded her repeatedly of Jon's status as a bastard, but she refused to take charge, and Jon was made the new king of the North.
Jon Snow avenged the Red Wedding. He is the White Wolf, the king in the North.
It seemed like none of Petyr's moves were working this time, especially with the Starks, who had recognized him for who and what he truly was. While Petyr was trying to win over Westeros, Varys was working to maintain peace in Dany's name across the Narrow Sea. You see, when Daenerys disappeared on Drogon, Meereen descended into complete chaos. That's when Varys stepped up and devised a plan with Tyrion to find out who was paying the Sons of the Harpy.
Soon they'll return, singing songs of men in gold masks.
Varys used his little birds to find out which masters of Astapor, Yunkai, and Volantis were involved in the rebellion, and then asked Tyrion to arrange a meeting with them. His idea turned into a fantastic success, as the peace deal between Tyrion and the Masters stabilized Meereen to a great extent.
Slaveholders will be compensated for the losses, of course, at fair prices.
But since all this happened behind closed doors, Tyrion wanted to make sure that the common folks knew that Dany was actually responsible for bringing back the city's peace. So Tyrion enlisted an unusual ally, Kinvara, who was also the High Priestess of the Red Temple of Volantis, to spread the news. Varys was obviously not thrilled with Tyrion's choice because of his hatred for magic, but Kinvara convinced Varys to trust her anyway, and in the end, she proved to be a valuable addition to the team, putting Varys' fears to rest.
I will summon my most eloquent priests. They will spread the word.
Once Meereen was at peace, Varys left Tyrion and traveled to Westeros, where he had quietly engineered one of the best alliances the show had ever seen. You see, after half the Tyrells disappeared in Cersei's wildfire, Olenna was desperate for revenge. At the same time, Ellaria Sand, who had lost her lover to King's Landing, also wanted to bring Cersei down. So Varys brought the two of them together in Dorne and offered them a deal they could not refuse.
What is my heart's desire?
Vengeance. Justice.
Fire and blood.
By the time Varys was done, he had secured the Tyrell army and the Dornish fleet for Daenerys. That single move officially ended the Lannisters' hope of winning a conventional war. And when Daenerys finally sailed towards Westeros, Varys accompanied her on the flagship, proving just how important he was in Daenerys' team. So, who leads on the chessboard now? Where do the pieces lie? Honestly, for the first time in this video, it's Varys. While Littlefinger was stuck in the north trying to convince Sansa to trust him and failing, Varys was moving around the world, building an unbeatable super team. Sure, Baelish won a battle at Winterfell, but Varys built the army that was about to change Westeros' destiny. Varys actually walked away from the table with the only chips that mattered. 3 dragons, a queen people actually believed in, and a united front of Dothraki, Unsullied, and the full might of the South. Breaking the wheel. Petyr was still in the north, trying his best to reclaim his position of trust and power. When Jon left Winterfell to meet Daenerys, he left Sansa in charge of the north. From there on, Petyr's primary goal was to isolate Sansa so he could remain her sole advisor, and eventually become her king.
Fight every battle, everywhere, always, in your mind.
But this plan became very hard to execute since Bran returned home and joined Sansa. Petyr tried his luck with Bran by offering him the Valyrian steel dagger that was used to attack him, but Bran was neither interested nor impressed by the gift. Instead, he said something that instantly made Petyr panic.
Chaos is a ladder.
Petyr did not understand what being the three-eyed raven really meant, which is why he underestimated Bran, but he would realize his mistakes soon enough. Meanwhile, Arya returned to Winterfell as well for a long overdue reunion. And although Arya was just a child, Petyr knew she was dangerous, so he started looking for ways to pit the two sisters against one another.
You swore to serve both my mother's daughters, didn't you?
Starting with intentionally leading Arya to discover an old letter Sansa had written, begging Robb to swear fealty to Joffrey. Petyr wanted to make Arya suspicious, and he succeeded. And when Arya confronted Sansa over said letter, the conversation got heated enough to satisfy Petyr. From then on, Petyr kept whispering in Sansa's ear, planting seeds of doubt against Arya and Jon.
I was a child.
So was I. I would have let them kill me before I betrayed my family.
But Sansa still didn't trust Petyr completely, so she voiced her concerns to her brother, Bran. And that's when the entire web Petyr had spent a lifetime weaving began to unravel. Sansa ordered a trial for murder and treason, and when Arya entered, Petyr thought his hard work had finally paid off. But Sansa's next question took Petyr by surprise.
How do you answer these charges, Lord Baelish?
That's when Petyr realized his game was over. One by one, Sansa counted each of Petyr's crimes against the Starks and the Vale, and when Petyr tried to deny the charges, Bran showed him the power of the three-eyed raven.
None of you were there to see what happened. None of you knows the truth.
You held a knife to his throat. You said, I did warn you not to trust me.
By now, Petyr was desperate and begged Sansa to spare his life, but the North always remembers. And in one quick movement, Arya killed Petyr with his own dagger, ending the game he had tried his entire life to win. And while Petyr met a tragic end, Varys was conquering the complex world of Westeros with Daenerys Targaryen, the Dragon Queen. The fleet's first stop was Dragonstone, and that's where Daenerys boldly questioned Varys' loyalty towards the Mad King, and then Robert Baratheon. And since Varys had betrayed them both, Dany wasn't sure if he could ever be truly loyal to her.
What kind of a servant is that?
The kind the realm needs.
But Varys stood his ground and reminded the new queen that he didn't serve the crown. Instead, he served the realm and its people. Daenerys was eventually satisfied, but she warned Varys that if she ever turned into a bad ruler, he should confront her rather than plot her replacement behind her back.
I swear it, my queen.
Varys agreed to her terms, but when he noticed the first sign of her ruthlessness during the Gold Road attack, Varys voiced his concerns to Tyrion only. However, the war with the Night King redeemed Daenerys in Varys' eyes, considering she risked her life and her dragons to protect the realm. But that image changed again when Daenerys began to truly unravel with Missandei and Rhaegal's death. She turned paranoid and mentally unstable, something Varys hadn't expected of her.
This is a mistake.
You saw my child fall from the sky. They took Missandei.
And Varys, whose loyalty was always to the realm, realized that her mental state was a direct threat to millions of innocents in King's Landing. And after Varys learned about Jon's true identity as a Targaryen, he believed Jon was the better option. Jon was a man who didn't want the throne, was loved by the people, and had a temperament that wouldn't lead to mass slaughter. So Varys started writing letters to the lords of Westeros to spread the truth about Jon's birth. Varys also tried to convince Tyrion that they were on the wrong side, and when nothing worked, he confronted Jon with the truth and encouraged him to step up as the rightful king.
You will rule wisely and well, while she
is my queen.
But his bold moves didn't go unnoticed, and it was Tyrion who eventually betrayed Varys to Daenerys. And when the queen heard of Varys' conspiracy to remove her, he was shackled and escorted to the shores of Dragonstone.
I hope I deserve this. Truly I do. I hope I'm wrong.
Varys didn't give any excuses or explanation. He simply stood before Dany like an equal, until she ordered Drogon to burn him alive. Everything Varys had feared became a reality when Daenerys burned down King's Landing, despite its surrender, and Tyrion regretted not listening to his friend's warning. Although both characters died in the end, Petyr Baelish died a coward's death, begging for mercy, for his own ego, for his failing plans and the House of Cards had finally collapsed beneath him. While Varys died with a quiet dignity, accepting his fate because he knew he was the only one left speaking for the common people. Petyr Baelish, for all his grand ideas and designs, played a small game. Petyr wanted a chair, a title, and a girl who reminded him of his past. And he spent his life building a ladder that only he could climb. But the problem with a ladder like that is that it only takes one person to tip it over. So when the Starks finally saw him for who he really was, Petyr had nowhere to go but down. On the other hand, Varys played a much bigger game. Instead of titles and money, Varys wanted a better future, so he built a web that spanned 2 continents over many, many years. He kept Daenerys safe from enemies, eventually brought her to Westeros, and united the great houses under her banner. Varys successfully put a Targaryen back on the Iron Throne, even though it wasn't the girl he'd rooted for. But with Jon eventually killing Dany and Bran taking her place on the throne, Westeros did become a better place, just as Varys had hoped. So, the title for the best player in Game of Thrones, well, it goes to Varys. Who do you think played the better game? Tell us in the comments below, and watch our video right here. Let me point an arrow towards it so you don't miss it, like there, on your screen. Click it now!